Philippines and Singapore has a long and very good bilateral relationship. It started in 1969 when we opened our first embassy in Singapore. That's why next year we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary of bilateral relationship between Philippines and Singapore. And as I said, our relationship has been very good, and we continue to try to enhance that relationship in various areas, whether in trade and investments or defense or even cultural. Singapore, for example, is our biggest trading partner here in ASEAN. We have approximately $10 billion of trade between Philippines and Singapore. And they're also one of the biggest source of OFW remittances. We receive about 1.75 billion remittance from Singapore every year. The relationship that we have with Singapore in terms of investment and trade is, I think, quite close and getting even closer. As I said, Singapore is actually the biggest source of investment for the Philippines in terms of the ASEAN region. So we receive the most amount of investment from them. And most of these investments are in fact done through joint ventures. So there are many companies, several companies in the Philippines that have joint ventures with Singaporean companies. So as a result of working closely together in the joint ventures, Philippine and Singapore companies learn from each other. The Singaporean companies learn how to do business in the Philippines within our environment, and then the Philippine companies naman learn also the way that Singapore does business. So Singapore actually is quite successful in their business practices, so we can learn from them. But in addition, I think more and more you will see Philippine companies also investing in Singapore. So there are companies in real estate and in banking that have now started opening companies here in Singapore. In addition, you can also find Philippine products now being sold in the supermarkets of Singapore, as well as our fast food chains opening stores here in Singapore. For example, the obvious one obviously is Jollibee, but also other companies have also opened up here. And I foresee that more and more of this will happen in the years to come. Kaya nga, so aside from the fact that Singapore has already quite a large amount of investment in the Philippines, they still continue to look for more opportunities in the Philippines. So they have been asking about different business opportunities, different companies that they can talk to, that we can introduce to them so they can discuss possible business opportunities. And this will not only be limited to big companies, but I think more and more, even the small and medium enterprises of Singapore companies are looking for opportunities to expand. And the Singapore government, through their Enterprise Singapore, which is a government body, they actively assist their Singaporean companies in exploring business opportunities abroad. And they give them assistance, and then they organize meetings, organize forums where Singaporean companies can see how they can invest. So the Philippines has been, of course, enjoying quite a lot of growth in the last few years. So we have now been picked up on the radar of Singaporean companies, so they are really looking for opportunities to invest. So actually, Singapore is one of our steadfast partners in terms of counter-terrorism and cyber security. Actually, during the Marawi siege, they actually provided us with assistance. It's just not, broadcasted, but they actually provided us with assistance. But also, subsequently, they have provided their training facilities. They've opened their training facilities. And we sent, I think, 40 or 50 soldiers to train here already in terms of urban warfare, because the Marawi siege was a different situation than what we were used to. So they provided the facilities and assist us in the training. And as I said, they're open to additional assistance if we will request it. As a tourism, we actually work through the Department of Tourism has a they don't have an attaché here, but they work with a person who promotes Philippine tourism, and the embassy also, we try to work with them, as well as our other Filipino partners here, like the airlines, for example, Philippine Airlines. And so for this year, for example, we are planning to have a tourism fair that will just specifically promote the Philippines to Singaporeans. Already, roughly 200,000 Singaporeans travel to the Philippines every year as tourists, whereas about 500,000 Filipinos come to Singapore. But of course, that means we can still try to improve that balance and try to get more Singaporeans to visit the Philippines. And I think that with additional emphasis on more tourism fairs, more cooperation with the travel agents in Singapore, and maybe more direct flights to the Philippines, we can easily bring up the number of Singaporean tourists. Roughly, there are about 180,000 OFWs, Filipinos working and living here in Singapore. Of that, about 60% would be considered professionals or skilled workers, and 60%, I mean, and then 40% are domestic workers, household workers. And so already you can see the Singapore society look naman on the Filipinos as contributors to their national development. That we, at 180,000, we are roughly maybe 4% of their population. So we actually have a significant impact on their economic development here. We perform functions in the professionals, for example, work in banks, in IT, they're engineers, they're architects. So they perform a lot of functions that are very much needed in Singapore. And then the skilled workers, they work in hotels, in restaurants. So they also provide very important functions. And even our domestic workers, I think most of them are recognized as at a much better level of worker than other nationalities. I mean, without trying to put down other nationalities, but they really are recognized because even my Singaporean friends, many of them tell me that they have domestic workers that have been staying with them now for so many years, and they're so happy with them, and they're like members of their family already. So I think that's where the Filipinos stand in Singapore. And the government naman is also, as I said, they recognize the contribution. And so the government in Singapore is actually quite responsible in terms of protecting the rights and promoting the welfare of our OFWs. I think occasionally you cannot naman totally avoid that there will be some crazy person, no? But I would say by and large in Singapore, we have much fewer cases like that. And I think the big difference between Singapore and other countries is that when there are cases like that, our OFWs can report the abuses to the Singapore police. And the Singapore police actually take action. So there have been already several cases of where the employers were actually arrested, tried, and when they're convicted, they are put in prison for abuse of the domestic workers. Not necessarily Filipinos alone, but other nationalities. If they are caught abusing, they will be put in jail. And that's what we also teach our OFWs, every other month we have a seminar here called Post-Arrival Orientation Seminar, where we tell them what are their rights and their duties in Singapore. So one of the rights that we tell them is that they have the right to complain. If they are being mistreated, they're not being fed properly, they're not being given their day off, they can complain. And the police or the manpower department will come and investigate. And of course, the embassy itself is always ready to assist them, and we always support them when they have these types of complaints. Well, for sure, I think it is quite well known that the OFWs here in Singapore are very, very supportive of the president. I think during the election, they say that 80% of the OFWs voted for the president. And also when he came in December of 2016, his first visit, the response was overwhelming, and they had a Philcom at that time, and everybody was very excited about it. And so we expect that, we know that the president still enjoys a very, very high support and from the trust from the OFWs here in Singapore. For example, when we opened the registration for the Philcom meeting on Saturday, it took less than 24 hours for the 6,000 slots to be taken. And that's considering that it's for a Saturday, and where many of the OFWs also may not be on leave, no? But still, it took less than 24 hours to fill it up. For the ASEAN, following our successful Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN last year, I think the presence of the president here, number one, will show our solidarity with Singapore, since they are now the chairman for this year's ASEAN. But I think we also expect the president to be pursuing certain policy issues that the Philippine government consider as important. Number one is, of course, migrants, workers' rights and welfare. So definitely that will be high on the agenda for us. Also, maritime security, as well as economic development and integration. The theme kasi this year for Singapore is, their theme of their ASEAN is resilience and innovation. So yung resilience nila is resilience against terrorism, against violent extremism, but also against yung natural disasters, which happens a lot to some of the ASEAN countries. Singapore is lacking, wala sila, pero yung ibang countries experience it. And for innovation naman, the idea is to improve the lives of ASEAN citizens by harnessing technology and promoting connectivity. So one of the projects ng Singapore is to push this smart city, and then they want to push a network of smart cities within ASEAN, so that it will parang future-proof ASEAN, so that the citizens can have a better life in the future. Well, I can assure our kababayans here in Singapore and in the Philippines as well that the Philippine Embassy is very cognizant of its mandate, which is to promote the interests of the Philippines, as well as, of course, protect the rights and promote the welfare of our citizens here. As I said, the Philippine Embassy is open. Our doors are open to any suggestion or feedback that our kababayans may have, and that we have a very dedicated staff here of people dedicated in the assistance to national section, as well as in our Philippine Overseas Labor Office, POLO. And in the short period of time that I've been here, the last 3-4 months, I have seen how dedicated they are in terms of doing hospital visits, doing prison visits, and attending all the cases as they are tried in court. And we provide lawyers if the OFW doesn't have the means to provide themselves with a lawyer. We hire a lawyer, we provide an interpreter if that's necessary. We coordinate closely with the Singapore Police Force, and we make sure that they get a fair trial. And we also work hard to keep them in touch with their next of kin. And for those that may unfortunately meet an accident here or pass away, we also arrange for the repatriation. So we stand ready to carry out the mandate of the government as well as the instruction of the President that we take the utmost care, the best care of our OFWs here.